Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome to episode 4 in this series of building my modular model railway. Yeah, episode 4 already, it's crazy. In the previous episode I showed you how I was joining all the baseboards together and aligning the track and the scenery and everything, and that episode went down really well, so thank you so much to everybody who watched and enjoyed that. In that episode I was sort of demonstrating all of that with the Bufferstop module, which I was kind of part of the way through building at the time, and I did promise that in this episode I would show you the process of making that module from start to finish. So yeah, that's what you've got to look forward to in this episode today. The Bufferstop module, as you can imagine, is quite a bit smaller than my other modules. It is essentially just a straight piece of track with a buffer stop on the end. And a few of you may be wondering why I'm even bothering to build this board, but there's actually a couple of very good reasons for doing it. So the first is that it kind of acts as a bit of an end stop. So while I'm building the rest of my modules, to stop locos just sort of falling off the edge of the world where the modules run out, it's kind of handy just to have a bit of track with a buffer stop on the end, and that'll just clamp onto the end, and it kind of just neatly bookends the layout, I guess. The main reason for building it though is that when I get round to building my station modules, the Bufferstop module will go on the other end of those, and it'll sort of act as a head shunt for the station loop, so I can run the layout in an end-to-end formation from the fiddle yard through to the station before I complete building the rest of the circuit. So yeah, I think that's kind of everything I need to explain. Without further ado, let's get on with some actual modelling. So, starting off with the baseboards, and when I bought my wood from B&Q, I also got them to cut it into 50cm wide strips, as that was the width I decided my modules would be. However, I did end up with an offcut that was only 40cm wide, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with this until I realised I could use it for the Bufferstop board. Since the buffer module isn't that long, I decided to use the 40cm side as the length, which meant I had to measure and cut a 50cm section off the rest of the board, as you can see here. With the wood cut, all I needed to do now was to use some strip wood to brace the plywood top, and I attached this using screws. Then it was time to lay the track. As this module is quite small, the track only consists of a single line ending in a buffer stop. Once I'd measured the length I wanted my section of track to be, I cut it down to size, ready for it to be put into position. At the same time, I also cut a strip of cork that I'm using as underlay for the track. This was stuck down with PVA glue and then left to dry with some weights on top. Sometime later I was able to remove the weights and then put the track back into place. You can also see that I've now added the positive and negative wires that feed the power to my track from the controller. As all my wiring goes under the baseboard, I made a mark where each of the wires was, and I drilled a hole right through the baseboard. I then threaded the wire through, and they're now almost invisible and will be covered completely once the ballast is in place. If you saw the previous episode where I talked about aligning the track on this module, then it was at this point that I soldered the rails to the brass screws. Then I was ready to nail down my track using track pins. First, I drill a pilot hole into the sleeper, and this is just to get the pin to stand up straight, which can be a bit of a challenge. With the pin sitting in the hole, it's now time to hammer it into place. As there's not much track on this board, I only use 2 pins, as remember the ballast I add later will also hold it in place. Next, it was time to think about the landscape, and this time I opted to use some polystyrene blocks from some packaging, which I cut down to size to fit the landscape I had in mind. I then put super glue all over the bottom of the polystyrene blocks in order to stick them down, and then smaller bits were gradually added later on to fill in any gaps. The polystyrene was then covered in a layer of mod rock, which allowed me to smooth out some of the bumps and gradients, and also gave me a nice hard base to add the scenery onto later. Once all the mod rock was applied, it didn't take long to dry, and so I was able to move on to the next step fairly quickly. In a few areas, I finished off the landform by adding a little bit of modelling compound. This was mostly around the end plate area so that I could get the landscape to match up to the end plate contour perfectly. While the polystyrene fills out most of the area, it's difficult to get it to follow the contour exactly, so using the modelling compound allows me to just fine-tune the last few millimeters. Once the compound was dry, the whole module was covered in a brown paint just to give the impression of dirt under the rest of the Scenics. Then it was time to do the ballasting. As before, I just added this to the layout a little bit at a time, and I used a brush to move it around until I was happy with how it all looked. With the ballast in position, I then covered the whole track area in the standard mix of watered down PVA and a few drops of washing up liquid using a syringe. As you can see, this mixture gradually seeps through all the ballast, locking it together so that it dries nice and hard. Now, something I did on a previous module was to add a layer of dirt alongside the track where the grass thins out, and I've decided to do the same on this module too. Using my fingers, I sprinkle the dirt onto a strip of PVA glue I've laid down next to the ballast, and once it's dry, the excess can simply be brushed away. I've also created a small pathway towards the back of the module too, as I have an idea for a small scene I'd like to create up here in the future. Finally, the last step, and one that makes a big difference, is to add the static grass. I covered the entire board in PVA glue, and then I put down my first layer. As you can see, all of a sudden it's starting to look a lot more like a model, but the grass does look a bit too much like a football pitch at the moment. To make it seem more wild, I added some extra layers over the top using the Pico layering spray. As you might be able to tell, each layer is a different colour and a different length too, so gradually I'm using it less and less over the entire board and more in select areas to create, for example, the patches of dry grass that you can see starting to emerge. With the static grass done, the module looks pretty much finished at this point. There's still lots of details to add, but the basic scenery is all there. The final touch is to add the buffers, and this is just a Pico buffer stop that I've modified and painted myself. If you're interested in how I did that, then you can click the link at the top right of your screen now to watch a tutorial where I run through the entire process. With all that work done though, it was time for a little mini running session just to check that everything was working as expected. So this is pretty much the end of phase 1 of my modular railway build. If you remember my plans back from episode 1, I've made the fiddle yard and 2 scenic corner boards, and now with this Bufferstop module, that's the first phase complete. The next phase will be starting work on the station area, which I'm really looking forward to, but I imagine it'll take a lot longer too, as that will be the main focus of the layout. Before that though, I'd like to try and finish off some of the remaining details on these existing scenic boards, so adding fences and bushes and really trying to bring the modules to life, so keep an eye out for that in the future. If you haven't already though, please do subscribe to the channel as it really does help out, and make sure you click the bell icon as well to get notifications when new videos are released. But that's all for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!